Biological Beginnings. It is an interesting chapter. It's interesting in the sense that it really kind of explores the role that nature plays in how we develop. And I always like to start this particular chapter by asking the class, what makes you who you are? Are you the product of your genes? Or are you more the product of your environment, nurture? It is quite interesting. They begin the chapter looking at some identical twins, Jim Springer and Jim Lewis, which is so fascinating. These were twins that were at birth, were separated from each other, raised in different communities, and so we can really see the distinction between what role nature is, genes, and the role that nurture plays, because these are the identical genes, but they're in two different environments, and the similarities are just amazing. They've also have the Daphne and Barbara, the Giggle sisters, without giggling being a part of their family history. But what I think is interesting is not in the text, and that is they had an interesting study on identical twins that again were separated at birth. And this just fascinates me because I always think, where do dreams come from? I'll land this plane in a minute. Where do dreams come from? And most people say, well, they're just things that we've maybe been exposed to in our environment, or they might be prophetic for some people. There's always different theories about what dreams would come from. There was an interesting study, though, that was done on some twin sisters that were again separated at birth. And when you look at them, they're at all these identical things. But this is the part that just amazes me. And I think it was around age 8 or 9, they began to have the same nightmares. But these were weird nightmares. These nightmares were being suffocating to death by fish hooks. How weird is that? Same dream, identical twins, separated at birth, began and ended at the same time. I think they stopped at age 13. Isn't that amazing? It just always amazes me, the role that maybe our genetics play in who we are. So it starts out, it's just kind of an introduction to the chapter, and then we talk about evolutionary perspective. And, evolutionary perspective can be kind of a challenging theory for a lot of people. I can appreciate that. But I want you to think back about, what would the ideal husband be 500 years ago? What would that person be like? He's probably going to be 500 years ago. He's probably going to be aggressive. He's going to be a big guy. Probably don't need for him to be, a good communicator, a hard worker for sure. Probably aggressive. You want him to be aggressive, so he goes out and takes care of the bear and the mountain lion that's trying to eat you. So you might want that, right? And so what kind of child is that he's going to have? He's going to have a kid that's born, maybe weighs 30 pounds and comes out fighting and aggressive. That's that child. Now, let's fast forward to today. What's the ideal husband today? Most of my classes, when I ask them this question, this is how they would describe him. They want him to be not like Arnold Schwarzenegger, full of muscles, but not a wimpy guy, athletic, maybe fit at least, be very smart. They want him to be a good communicator. They want him to be to understand his emotions, not like crying at sunsets, but know what an emotion is, right? And smart, well educated, and so his children are going to be drastically different from the husband 500 years ago. His child is probably going to be smaller in size, and is probably going to be a little bit more intelligent than that person was 500 years ago. That aggressiveness, we want him to be aggressive, but not like domestic violent aggressive, but aggressive maybe at the workplace, more assertive than aggressive in the workplace, so that he is successful. And so we can see, well, evolution does kind of play a role in our development, And so it is quite interesting. That's how I kind of begin this particular chapter with my class. Let's see what are some of the highlights there. We do look at genes. We spent a lot of time looking at genes, page 52. with our nucleus. We've got a single cell, a nucleus. Within the nucleus is chromosome. The chromosome is made up of DNA. Let me bring my notes down here real quick. And of course, within the DNA is our genes, our genetics make us up. Now, there's two types of cell division that we're looking at throughout the chapter, but primarily focusing here. One is mitosis, which is cell division. And by the way, your cells are dividing right now as we speak. If they're not dividing, you're dead. In fact, we can tell from end segments of your DNA called telomeres the day you're going to die. Aside from being killed by rampaging hamsters or something like that, we can tell how many times your cells are going to multiply. When they stop multiplying, they divide. Or when they stop dividing, not multiplying. When they stop dividing, you die. So that's mitosis. Then there's meiosis, which is cell division in an egg and sperm and fertilization associated with it, which is a key component over on page 54 in the 16th edition text. We look at dominant and recessive genes, which is really kind of interesting. What we find is that we've got an XX and an XY chromosome. XX are female chromosomes. XY are males. This is all the 23rd sex chromosome. And what we find is that XY chromosome makes males more genetically fragile. So I always feel like I should have a shirt, be nice to me, because I'm genetically fragile. But it's that XY chromosome is why more males than females succumb to illnesses or disorders more so than females. Females more often are carriers. For example, hemophilia being one example of that. We talk about that. Gene-linked abnormalities, which is really quite interesting. PQ, sickle cell anemia. We looked at reproductive challenges and choices, trying to see if there's something that stands out that I really want you to focus on. We've seen things change tremendously over the course of just me teaching this course over the course of time, as far as ways of determining whether or not something is going wrong during a woman's pregnancy. Let's see. I didn't think of anything else. We talked about infertility and reproductive technology, explaining IUF. One particular book that's really good on it, although I'm not too thrilled about the author right now because he's kind of fallen into some dispute, and that is Lance Armstrong. He wrote a book called It's Not Just the Bike, and he talked about the process that he and his now ex-wife went through as they had children. He was diagnosed with testicular and lung and I think brain cancer too. I'm not sure about that part. But he had to, he became sterile after his treatment. And so he had saved sperm so that he could have children later on. And he talks about that whole process. It really is a good book. Aside from his kind of tainted history, it was a really good book. The last thing I think they talk about that is kind of interesting, things to be focusing on, is heredity, environment, interaction. That's again the nature versus nurture debate. And they look at twin studies. These are identical twins primarily that are separated at birth, and to see what the differences are between them. They also looked at heredity, environment, correlations, passive genotype, environment, evocative genotype, and then the active nitpicking genotype or genotype environmental correlations. So let me just briefly tell you what those are. The passive genotype environment is just the home that the child is raised in. For example, my home that I was raised in was pretty scholarly. There was a lot of reading. There wasn't a whole lot of television watching, and so and it was a very quiet home. And so as a result of that, I love reading. It's part of who I am. And that's based off of that passive evocative environment that affected me. Then there's their passive genotype environment, Then there is the evocative genotype environment, and that is what the child brings into it. For example, I had one daughter, one of my 3 children. They were all beautiful, wonderful kids, but one of my children was just amazing. When she was born, she never cried. She cooed. She smiled. Wow, she was just wonderful. I had another child who was just crying, very colicky. Poor thing, you just felt for him. But he had some real challenges when he was little. He's a beautiful man now, but he had some challenges back then. And I can tell you that I certainly held my daughter more than I held him, just because he was so upset all the time. I thought I was hurting him, so I would often give him to my wife to comfort him, because I wasn't doing too good of a job for him. And so that's the environment that the child brings into the home. And then there's the active genotype environment correlation, and that is where the child actually reaches out to others, reaches out to other children. You know, they kind of the outgoing child, the way they play in their environment. Then they looked at shared or non-shared environmental experiences. Two kids from the same family maybe have totally different views of the world. And again, that can be because maybe one's a boy, one's a girl. One's a firstborn, one's a baby, the baby of the family. And so they'll have different environmental, even though they're in the same home, they'll have different experiences within that home. And then the epigenetic view just kind of combines everything. It says that development reflects an ongoing bidirectional interchange. That it's not just the child, or it's not just the environment, it's this interaction between the two of them. And that, guys, finishes up an introduction to Chapter 2. All right, thank you very much, guys.